Her fingers were still on my future. Even now, 8 years later, I remember the way Clara used to hold a pen, deliberate, like everything she touched mattered. Maybe that's what drew me to her first. Not the way she looked, though she was beautiful in that sleek, calculated kind of way. It was her intensity, the way she folded ambition into every word, like she'd already mapped out the next 10 years of our lives. And back then, I wanted to live in that map. We had just finalized the wedding date, October 14th, a fall wedding, her favorite season. Leaves, amber tones, a small ceremony, followed by a rooftop reception under string lights and speeches. We even had the playlist half-built, toggling between indie love songs and classic soul. That night, we were laughing over cake samples when I caught her staring at Marcus across the room. But I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? Marcus had been my best friend since university. We'd gone through hell together, failed startups, broken leases, late-night ramen when our bank accounts dipped under zero. He was my brother in every way that counted. And Clara? She was the woman I was going to marry. Or so I thought. Looking back, I can see the signs. The two frequent dinners the two of them had in my absence under the guise of brainstorming. The way Marcus suddenly became obsessed with wearables, Clara's domain, even though he barely used his smartwatch. How she started saying "we" when talking about her firm's next phase, even when I wasn't involved. But back then, I was neck-deep in a product launch for a logistics client and too blinded by trust to question the details. I even remember Marcus's toast at our engagement party planning dinner. To the future Mrs. Adler, he had said, lifting his glass with that grin that made women and investors lean in. May your startup always outrun your love life. Everyone laughed. Even me. I didn't see it for what it was, a warning wrapped in charm. One evening, she and I sat on the balcony of our apartment. The city hummed below, and she leaned against my shoulder, talking about IPO strategies and impact investing. I remember feeling overwhelmed with pride, how lucky I was to be hers. We're going to be the power couple everyone envies, she said. No one will touch us. I nodded. Unstoppable, I replied. I didn't know she already had another plan. That betrayal doesn't come like a thief in the night. Sometimes it walks in the front door with a briefcase and your best friend's cologne. They say betrayal hurts most when it comes from those you break bread with. That truth punched me the morning I walked into Clara's office with lunch, her favorite, chicken pho from that hole-in-the-wall place in Midtown, and found her assistant frozen at the door. She's, in a meeting, she said, too quickly. I waited. 20 minutes later, Clara stepped out with Marcus. She looked surprised to see me, like she'd forgotten I existed. Oh, she said. You didn't text. Marcus just gave that same grin, slapped my back, and said, Adler, always on time. Love that. I chalked it up to awkwardness. The kiss she gave me was light, distant, but I kissed her back. The real unraveling didn't happen in some dramatic scene. No slammed doors. No confrontation. It came in layers. The way she started leaving her laptop closed around me. How Marcus began bailing on our weekly poker nights. How Clara's working late hours became entire weekends. I still cooked dinner. Still waited up. Still played the role of the man who believed. Until one evening, I walked into our apartment, and her closet was half empty. Her ring was gone from the dish beside the sink. No note. No call. Just absence. Silence that echoed through every room. Marcus didn't return my calls for 2 days. Then, on the morning of what was supposed to be our engagement dinner, my phone pinged with a notification. LinkedIn. Clara had posted a photo, she and Marcus arm in arm at a tech gala. Captioned, When vision aligns and love follows. Hashtag power couple of the year. The comments were filled with congratulations. Hearts. Fire emojis. I stared at the screen, trying to breathe, trying to believe that what I was seeing wasn't real. But it was. It was real, and it was final. I didn't reply. Didn't comment. I turned off my phone, walked out of the apartment we'd shared, and stood on the sidewalk for what felt like hours. Somewhere between disbelief and rage, I felt something else, a detachment. Like a rope had been cut. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was unmoored. But even then, even with her fingers still metaphorically holding the edges of my future, I didn't yell. I didn't curse her name. I didn't hunt them down or spiral on social media. I simply walked. Around the city. Past all the places we'd made memories. Past our favorite bookstore. The park where we used to pretend we had time. Past the coffee shop where she first kissed me on a rainy afternoon. I walked until the ache turned into numbness, until her grip finally loosened. And when I got home, back to the apartment I was now alone in, I packed my things. Not hers. Just mine. I took the lease she forgot was in my name, called the landlord, and ended it. I left behind the couch we bought together, the cutlery set from her mother, the photos on the fridge. I left it all, because whatever future Clara had imagined, she was welcome to it. But it wouldn't include me. That night, I booked a one-way ticket to the coast. Not because I had a plan, but because staying would mean living in the wreckage. I wasn't going to be one of those men who sat in the ashes, replaying what he lost. If Clara and Marcus wanted to be a headline, let them be. I was done starring in their story. It was time to start writing my own. And for that, I needed distance. I needed air. I needed the kind of beginning that doesn't come with a ring or a toast or a hashtag. Just silence and space. The kind you build a real future in. One she could never touch again. It started small. So small I feel foolish now for not noticing. A forgotten text. A last-minute meeting. Clara saying, "We just lost track of time," with that breezy voice she used when she wanted me to drop a subject. And I did. I dropped it every time. Because I trusted her. Because she had never given me a reason not to, until Marcus started showing up more often than he should have, always with a laptop under his arm and that hungry gleam in his eye, the one he wore whenever he smelled a business opportunity. I had seen him like that in pitch meetings, networking events, even once at a poker table when he realized the guy next to him had no idea how to bluff. Clara and Marcus had known each other professionally for a while, same accelerator circles, shared investors, but I never imagined their collaboration would extend beyond the conference room or our apartment. I remember one night in particular. Clara had texted, saying she was stuck in a last-minute meeting with a VC firm in the South Loop. It was almost 11 p.m. I had already eaten dinner alone, cleared the plates, and sat staring at the door, waiting to hear her keys jingle in the lock. They never did. The next morning, she came in smelling like hotel shampoo and barely touched the coffee I made her. "You look tired," she said. I nodded, swallowing the words that pressed against the back of my teeth. A week before our engagement dinner, the excuses multiplied. Marcus is helping me restructure our pricing model. Marcus says our burn rate could use a second set of eyes. Marcus thinks we should try something bold for the keynote at AlphaCon. Marcus. Like he had suddenly become her mirror. And I became the man making coffee in the background while they built an empire without me. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was overthinking it, that they were just chasing a vision together. But deep down, something was slipping, something vital. I called Marcus once that week, late after midnight, just to talk, just to hear his voice and remind myself that this was my friend, my brother. He didn't answer, sent a text 2 hours later. "Sorry, bro," slammed. "Talk soon." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Talk soon. The phrase felt like someone handing me an umbrella during a hurricane. The night before our engagement dinner was when it all snapped. Clara vanished. No texts. No calls. Nothing. I went to the venue alone, hoping she'd walk through the door, even if it was with an apology I didn't yet know how to receive. But she never came. People asked polite questions. My mother looked at me with 1,000 silent worries in her eyes. I said she must have had an emergency. Work stuff. Something. Anything. I smiled through it. Shook hands. Even made a toast. Alone. Then, the next morning, I saw it. A LinkedIn post. There they were. Clara and Marcus, standing arm in arm under a golden banner that read, "Tech Disruptor Gala." She wore the green silk dress she said she'd saved for our honeymoon. He wore the navy tux he once joked made him look like he ran Wall Street. Their flutes clinked mid-laugh, eyes glittering. And the caption, "When vision aligns and love follows. Proud to announce our new journey. Hashtag Power Couple of the Year. Hashtag Startups and Love." I didn't move. My body felt like it had turned to stone. Not the good kind, the kind that cracks under pressure. The kind that sits heavy in your chest until it poisons your thoughts. I scrolled through the comments, each one carving a deeper hole. Finally, "You two are unstoppable. Match made in innovation heaven." I couldn't find myself in that story. I wasn't even a footnote. Just a forgotten draft in someone else's final pitch deck. Marcus ghosted me. Plain and simple. No apology. No explanation. Just vanished like a deleted email. And Clara? She blocked me on everything within 24 hours. Like I was the problem. like I had been holding her back all along. I tried calling her once. Just once. She didn't pick up. The voicemail beeped, and I found myself saying her name into the void, followed by silence. I didn't know what I wanted from that call. Closure? Rage? A reason? But all I got was the sound of my own breath, the sad kind that tells you this is the end, whether you want it to be or not. I didn't eat for 2 days. Didn't sleep right for 5. Just stared at the ceiling, the blank TV screen, my own reflection. And then something shifted. On the 6th morning, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. Not the man they left behind, but the man who still had air in his lungs and blood in his veins. The man who could either sit in this betrayal or rise out of it. I grabbed my bag, packed only what I needed, and walked out. That apartment held too much of them. Too many echoes of what we had almost built. I couldn't stay. The walls felt like co-conspirators. The kitchen still smelled like her perfume. Even the bed felt like it sided with them. So I went to a friend's spare room, slept on a futon, ate cold pizza, and for the first time in months, I began to feel something close to clarity. People whispered, of course. Pity was offered like candy. You didn't deserve that, they said. She'll regret it. But I didn't want pity. I didn't want their hate either. What I wanted was air. I wanted to remember who I was before their headlines and hashtags. I wanted to stop hearing Clara's laugh in my dreams and Marcus's voice in my spine. I needed to stop replaying the moment I first introduced them and wondering if that was the bullet I'd handed them myself. So I deleted the post, removed them both from my network. Not in spite, in freedom. I needed them gone, not just off my screens, but out of my bloodstream, out of my story. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was slow, like a building with a rotten foundation. It creaks, it leans, and then one day, it folds without a sound. That was us. That was me. And I let it go, brick by brick. Because if everything could be taken with a post and a photo op, then it wasn't real to begin with. And I deserved something real. I didn't break anything, didn't scream, didn't cry in public, didn't drunk dial them or show up at their office. The rage was there, raw and biting, but it didn't explode outward. It turned inward, settled like coals in my chest. And instead of letting it burn me to ash, I let it forge something quieter, sharper. I moved out of that apartment with the kind of calm that comes only when you've passed the point of caring. I didn't even wait for the end of the lease. It was still in my name. Clara had never bothered to change that. So I called the landlord, handed back the keys, and told him he'd be dealing with legal issues if anyone stayed beyond the week. I left the furniture, the mattress, the framed print she loved. Even the air felt tainted, touched by too many memories of her laugh in the morning and her silence at night. All I took were my clothes, my books, and my tools, the pieces of me that hadn't been shaped by them. I remember the Uber ride to the airport vividly. The driver made small talk, asked where I was headed. I lied and said, vacation. He smiled and nodded, probably imagining I was running towards something beautiful. But the truth was I was running from the collapse. From the black hole that had formed in the center of my life. From the people I thought would be standing next to me when I turned 35. I wasn't going on vacation. I was going to disappear. I had no plan, just a ticket to the coast, a few weeks of severance from a contract job I'd finished early, and enough bitterness to fill a carry-on. When I landed in Harborview, a small coastal city with cliffs that looked like they'd been carved by gods with grudges, I didn't know a soul. That was the point. I found a short-term rental, something modest with creaky floors and peeling paint. It overlooked the docks. Fishing boats came and went like clockwork, indifferent to whatever drama people carried. That indifference saved me. I stayed quiet, kept to myself. I'd wake up at 5, run along the bluff until my lungs hurt, then come back and apply for jobs I didn't care about. I spent afternoons at the local library, reading case studies and business books, taking notes in the margins, rebuilding my mind from scratch. People pitied me when they learned the story. You must feel so betrayed, they'd say. I'd nod. I let them feel sorry for me. Let them hand me sympathy like it was a consolation prize. But inside, I was already shifting. I knew something they didn't. The ability to walk away without turning back. That was power. That was my first win. There was a moment, 2 months in, that changed everything. I was standing on the dock, watching a team unload metal crates, industrial materials for the new shipping yard expansion. The foreman, a guy named Ellis, was yelling at a young worker who couldn't figure out a pulley system. I stepped in. Not because I cared, but because watching someone fumble with leverage angles hurt my engineer's brain. I showed the kid a better way, explained the balance point and torque resistance. Ellis watched. Then he said, "You looking for work?" It started small. A part-time job consulting on loading designs. Then I got pulled into the industrial design process for some new warehouse layouts. That led to contract work with Harborview Logistics, and suddenly I was no longer the guy hiding behind coffee mugs and cold runs. I was building again, not just in blueprints and specs, but in myself. I started eating better, sleeping better. I cut ties with anyone who only knew me as Clara's fiancé. I stopped checking their social media, stopped wondering what Marcus was doing with my old life. It wasn't mine anymore, and the sooner I accepted that, the more room I had to craft something better. That's when I got the idea for Clay and Field. It came during a storm. A brutal coastal wind knocked over an old cargo hangar we'd been reinforcing. I sketched a better support system that night, one that could flex with the wind instead of fighting it. That sketch turned into a prototype. Then a proposal. Then funding. Within a year, I had partners, quiet, brilliant engineers and architects who didn't care about headlines or startup drama. Just purpose, precision, problem-solving. People back home started hearing whispers. He's in Harborview now. Didn't he start a firm? I heard he's doing international work. But I didn't return their calls. Didn't show up at weddings or reunions. I was done being the man people pitted or whispered about. I was building something they couldn't touch. A life with no fingerprints but my own. And that was the win. Walking away. Starting over. Not loudly, not to prove a point, but because it was the only path that let me breathe again. People think revenge is about dramatic comebacks. Explosive reveals. But real power? Real peace? It's walking down a different street and never looking back. I didn't leave Harborview to run forever. I left to find the version of me that existed before them. Before Clara's ambition eclipsed her love, before Marcus chose opportunity over loyalty. That man wasn't naive. He wasn't bitter. He was just unfinished. And walking away was the first step to completing him. So when I tell this part of my story now, I don't talk about heartbreak. I talk about choice. The choice to leave quietly, to not engage, to not chase down answers from people who had already made theirs clear. I chose silence over spectacle, distance over destruction. And from that quiet, I built something unshakable. They say your first win after a loss is survival. But mine wasn't just surviving. It was reclaiming myself completely, unapologetically, and without their permission. Harborview became more than a place to hide. It became the place I rebuilt myself, one blueprint at a time. In the early mornings, before the fog lifted off the bluffs, I'd run the same path, tracing a loop that cut through the cliffs and circled back past the industrial yards. The salt air, the cries of gulls, the rhythmic crash of waves, it all became part of my rhythm, stitching me together where Clara and Marcus had ripped me open. I took a job doing structural analysis for a mid-sized logistics company housed in an old naval warehouse. The work was gritty, often overlooked by the tech elite, but it was honest. I had to re-earn my credibility, not with flashy ideas, but with consistency. Quietly, I showed up. I corrected flawed schematics, rewrote outdated safety protocols, and proposed new materials that cut costs and increased stability. I didn't walk in wearing a suit anymore. I wore boots and a rolled-up work shirt, grease-streaked hands, and a quiet mind. It was physical, it was real, and it brought me back to something I hadn't felt in years, purpose without pretense. Nights were spent differently. At first, I studied to distract myself. Business law, international regulations, modular architecture, anything that kept my hands busy and my mind off what I'd left behind. But slowly, the studying turned into something more. I was laying a foundation for something bigger than contracts and shipping routes. My notebooks filled with sketches, ideas for sustainable housing, modular workspaces, portable facilities designed for high-risk zones. I wanted to build not just for profit, but for resilience. For people rebuilding their lives the way I was. 3 years after I left Chicago, I launched Clay and Field. The name came from a metaphor that stuck with me during one of those early morning jogs. Clay, malleable, capable of becoming anything when shaped with purpose. Field, open, grounded, with potential under the surface. Clay and Field was born from those two ideas. Transform what's broken and plant what can grow. It started as a small consulting group, just me and 2 colleagues from the docks, Ellis and Marin. Both brilliant, both real. No resumes padded with fluff, no egos dragging behind them like heavy luggage. We rented a narrow office above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and old wood. The floors creaked, and the Wi-Fi barely held up on rainy days, but we poured ourselves into that space. We created designs that could outlast hurricanes and war zones. We didn't pitch to investors in suits. We pitched to nonprofits, local governments, relief organizations. We weren't trying to be the next unicorn. We were trying to make things that didn't break when the world did. People didn't understand at first. "You were on track to be a millionaire before 30, someone from my past once messaged. Why are you designing mobile clinics in flood zones?" I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because they would never understand it. Wealth without meaning had nearly destroyed me. Now I was building meaning, and the wealth was following, slowly but steadily. The company expanded quietly, first to San Diego, then to Dakar, and later Lisbon. Not because I chased opportunity, but because we solved real problems. My phone started ringing again. People from that old world, the VC circles, the startup journalists, even Clara's old assistant, started reaching out. Requests for quotes, interviews, podcast features. I turned most of them down. I wasn't building for applause. I was building because it grounded me. Every blueprint, every bolt, every rivet in a modular shelter we shipped to Indonesia reminded me that I had taken what they thought was my end and turned it into a beginning. The thing about starting over is that the silence teaches you things. I learned how to live without constant validation. I learned how to let go of resentment. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. I no longer flinched at their names. I no longer replayed what I could have done differently. Because the truth was, if Clara could be taken, she was never really mine. And if Marcus could betray me for a shot at prestige, then he'd never truly been my friend. One night, after a site visit in Portugal, I stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the city, wind brushing against my jaw, the lights below soft and scattered. I wasn't thinking about Clara. I wasn't even thinking about Marcus. I was thinking about a boy in Aleppo who was going to sleep in a structure I helped design, a weatherproof, fire-resistant pod that could be assembled in under 3 hours. That was the moment I realized I had built something that could never tear down, something that didn't rely on who I used to be, something entirely, irrevocably mine. Clay and Field became more than a business, it became a movement. We trained refugees to build their own homes. We hired locals. We refused bloated salaries and empty titles. Our board wasn't stacked with influencers. It was made up of problem solvers. And we never branded ourselves as saviors. We were just builders. Quiet, relentless builders. There's a kind of strength that comes from making something with your own hands. Not code, not concepts. Something that can be touched, lived in, survived through. That strength became my identity. I didn't need to write essays about my comeback. I didn't need to post photos with inspiring captions. I simply let the work speak. Years later, when I finally Googled Clara out of curiosity, I saw their faces again. They were speaking at some conference in Dubai, smiling wide on stage, their bios puffed up with success metrics and self-congratulations. I felt nothing. Not bitterness. Not envy. Just distance. Like I was staring at a photo of strangers who once passed me in an airport. Because what I had now, they couldn't reach it. Couldn't buy it. Couldn't fake it. What I built with my bare hands didn't just change my career. It changed me. And that was the most powerful thing of all. I met Sienna on a night I almost didn't attend. I just wrapped a grueling 3-week project in Cape Verde, modular classrooms built on terrain so unstable it felt like balancing steel on sand. I was tired, not just in my bones, but in my mind. I wanted quiet, maybe a long nap and a glass of Malbec on my hotel balcony. But Ellis had insisted. "Just come to the damn fundraiser," he'd said. "You've been wearing the same boots for days. Put on a blazer and remember you're still a human." So I went. Lisbon. A private fundraiser tucked into a centuries-old villa that smelled of orange blossoms and old wood. The kind of place where champagne refilled itself and the appetizers looked like they belonged in glass cases. I shook a few hands, nodded at names I'd heard whispered in economic development circles, and stayed close to the back. I didn't do well with spectacle anymore. I was the guy who built things in silence, not the one who bragged about impact metrics to anyone who'd listen. And then I heard her voice. Not loud. Not demanding, just clear, steady. It cut through the noise like the first breeze after a storm. She was speaking to a small circle of men who looked like they'd come to donate out of guilt. The issue isn't innovation, she was saying. It's application. We have the tech to solve housing crises 10 times over. What we don't have is the infrastructure to apply it where it matters. Refugee camps don't need smart homes. They need smart logistics. I turned. There she was. Dr. Sienna Moreo. I'd read her papers. Followed her talks from afar like a fan who never thought he'd cross paths with the real thing. Nigerian American. Economist. Strategist. The kind of mind that didn't just identify global issues but cut through them with surgical precision. And there she was, standing 3 feet from the shrimp tray, dismantling decades of bureaucratic ego with nothing but calm facts. I waited until the group dispersed, then stepped in, not with a pitch, not with a compliment, but with a question. What would you build if bureaucracy didn't exist? She turned, and I swear her eyes paused for just half a second, like she was measuring me, not just hearing the words but weighing the intention behind them. Then she smiled. Shelters that adapt, schools that unfold, systems that don't collapse under stress. I'd build homes, I said, that outlive trauma. We talked for 2 hours. The food changed. The music shifted. The sky outside turned violet with night. And we stayed by the balcony, not trying to impress each other, just talking. She wasn't interested in capital. She wasn't dazzled by metrics or market shares. She asked about design theory, about dignity and displacement, about how to make a structure feel like hope instead of containment. I told her about clay and field, about Harborview, about walking away from the world I thought I belonged to and finding something better in the silence. At the end of the night, she handed me her card. No flourish, no flirtation, just a quiet gesture of trust. I want to show you something, she said. A proposal. The UN needs a new framework for community-first development zones, and I think you could help us build it. We met again 2 days later. This time, in her office in Geneva, a minimalist space filled with books, maps, and one black and white photo of her late father, a professor who had built his career advocating for land ownership rights in West Africa. Sienna wasn't just smart. She was driven by legacy. She carried it like armor, but never used it to shield herself from the world. She walked straight into chaos, rolled up her sleeves, and started fixing it. By the time we were halfway through our second meeting, I already knew I wanted her in my life. Not as a partner on a proposal, as a partner in everything. She was different from Clara in every conceivable way. Where Clara needed to be seen, Sienna needed to see. Where Clara used power to control a room, Sienna used clarity to invite others in. With Clara, I always felt like I had to catch up. With Sienna, I finally felt still, not stagnant, rooted. Our collaboration started with one project, a sustainable housing initiative for displaced communities in northern Mali. But it didn't end there. Weekly calls became daily ones. Meetings turned into dinners. By the time we launched Phase 2, I was flying back and forth between Lisbon and Geneva like the air itself was pulling me toward her. It wasn't about romance at first. It was respect, admiration, a gravitational pull I hadn't expected, but couldn't ignore. We kissed for the first time beneath a cracked lantern outside a development site in Ghana. The team had gone to bed. The power was out. We were reviewing survey results by flashlight. She looked up, smiled at something I'd said, and the silence between us shifted. It wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, and it was real. A year later, we were married. Quietly. Morocco. A town called Essaouira, tucked between the sea and the sky. No photographers. No influencers. Just us, a few close friends, and a promise carved into simplicity. She wore a white linen dress. I wore the same blazer I had on the night we met. We exchanged vows at dawn, on the rooftop of a riad, with the wind as our witness. Our lives blended like they'd always belonged together. We started the Stillwater Project, a think tank focused on community-centered rebuilding strategies. Our goal wasn't just to design buildings, it was to restore agency. We partnered with local leaders. We listened more than we spoke. And together, we created change that didn't need a spotlight. It just needed roots. People eventually found out. Magazine features. Award nominations. A few headlines tried to paint it as a redemption arc. Man left behind becomes global builder. Or some nonsense like that. I ignored it. So did she. Our story wasn't about revenge. It was about resonance. Clara and Marcus didn't cross my mind anymore. They had become distant background noise, static from another life. I had outgrown the frequency they lived on. With Sienna, I wasn't just healed, I was transformed. The world we were shaping together wasn't reactionary. It was revolutionary. I had built my company from the ashes of betrayal. But with Sienna, I built something even stronger, a life with no ghosts in the walls. Only light, only legacy, only forward. We married in Morocco under a rust-colored sky that seemed to stretch forever. There were no drones, no exclusive coverage, no brand deals hidden in floral arrangements. Just us, a handful of friends, and purpose, raw and real. I wore a simple linen suit, the kind you could sweat through without regret. Sienna walked barefoot down a sandstone path, her white dress catching the wind like a whisper. There was no music playing, only the sound of waves crashing far off and the soft rhythm of her footsteps. When we exchanged vows, I didn't think about the past. Not once. Not Clara. Not Marcus. They were smoke. Shadows behind a door I had sealed and walked away from. All I saw was the woman in front of me. Sharp, kind, and infinite. We didn't waste time after that. While some newlyweds drift into the haze of post-wedding indulgence, Sienna and I got to work. The Stillwater project started from a sketch on the back of a napkin during our layover in Madrid. If we want to fix what's broken in post-conflict zones, she said, tapping her pen, we can't keep designing like colonizers. We need human-centered architecture, education alongside shelter, dignity, not dependency. I nodded, already visualizing the first build. What if homes could be learning centers by day, shelters by night? I asked. Her eyes lit up. That's what we were. Idea forgers. Equal parts steel and soul. Our mission was to rebuild the shattered pieces of war-torn regions using infrastructure that didn't just stand, but taught, healed, and evolved. We partnered with communities in Syria, Mali, and northern Colombia. We hired local masons and engineers, trained displaced teens in 3D design software, and created mobile educational units that could move with shifting camps. It wasn't glamorous. We weren't doing TED Talks or launching flashy websites with buzzwords. We were on the ground, boots in mud, hands in blueprints, and hearts buried deep in the work. It's funny what you forget when you're consumed with meaning. I forgot what heartbreak felt like. I forgot how long I'd once measured my worth through someone else's eyes. I even forgot the sting of Marcus's betrayal, the twisted knife of Clara's silence. They faded like bad dreams I stopped retelling. All that remained was a quiet sense of satisfaction each time a village chief shook my hand, each time Sienna and I stood in a crowd of children learning inside a structure we'd helped raise. We'd sometimes work late into the night, surrounded by maps, numbers, and local dialect translations, debating the weight of corrugated steel versus compressed clay bricks. She'd scribble equations on my arm when the notepad ran out of space. I'd make tea the way she liked it, peppermint, with a sliver of ginger. We weren't just partners in business. We were rhythm. When she fell asleep on the couch, I'd cover her with the woven blanket we'd bought in Essaouira, the one she insisted felt like peace and fabric. And the best part? We didn't need to perform for each other. I didn't need to prove I'd recovered. She didn't need to pretend she was impressed by titles or connections. We built each other up in quiet ways. I fixed her laptop when the key stuck. She reviewed my contracts when I second-guessed myself. We never made a show of it. There was no scoreboard, just an endless exchange of trust and energy. That kind of love, it doesn't blaze. It steadies. But peace has a strange way of being interrupted. It was in early spring, during a summit in Geneva, that I saw the name on the speaker list. Marcus Dane, founder, Capital Craft Ventures. Topic: Scaling Innovation Through Disruption. I almost laughed. The same disruption he used to steal my future now had a keynote slot. His bio was littered with buzzwords and self-congratulatory nonsense. But then I saw the name beside his, Clara Vance, CTO of Claritech Solutions. I stared at it a while. It was like seeing your reflection in a funhouse mirror, distorted, distant, and oddly irrelevant. I closed the program, didn't mention it to Sienna. It wasn't important. Or so I thought. A few weeks later, an invitation arrived. One of those glossy, high-profile gala events where tech moguls pretended to save the world in tuxedos while drinking cocktails that cost more than some people earned in a month. We were both asked to speak, Sienna as the closing keynote, and me as a panelist on resilient design strategies. Stillwater had gained traction in ways we hadn't predicted. I was hesitant. "You sure you want to go?" I asked her. She smiled gently, brushing my collar. "They'll be there, won't they?" I nodded. She didn't flinch. Then let's go remind them who we became. The night of the gala, I watched her move through the room with effortless grace. She wore a midnight blue dress, her hair swept back, her expression a blend of intellect and warmth. People parted for her, not out of fear or fame, but out of respect. I stood at her side in a tailored black suit, no longer a man who had once been abandoned. I was a builder, a husband, a visionary, according to more than a few profiles that had floated across media outlets. But in that room, I was just her partner. I didn't look for Clara or Marcus. I didn't need to. The past always has a way of announcing itself. We stood near the central archway when I felt Sienna's hand tighten slightly around mine. I turned, and there they were. Clara, in a gold sequin dress, still elegant but somehow smaller than I remembered. Marcus, with flecks of gray in his beard, his smile just a little too wide. His eyes scanned me like I was a test he thought he'd already passed. He strolled over, drink in hand, with the confidence of a man who never learned to read a room. Well, he said, voice drenched in irony. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you were off, building tents in the desert or something. He laughed at his own joke. Clara stayed silent. I didn't blink. I just turned to Sienna, squeezed her hand, and replied, Love, meet Marcus and Clara, my old friend and ex-fiancé. She stepped forward with a smile so smooth it could have been velvet. Dr. Sienna Moreo, she said, extending her hand. Director of Global Innovation, UN, founder of Stillwater, and his wife. I watched it happen. The recognition, the unraveling. Marcus's smile faltered. Clara's lips parted slightly, a breath caught in her throat. And for the first time in years, I saw them not as villains in my story, but as people who had stopped growing the moment they chose the shortcut. We didn't gloat. We didn't explain. We didn't need to. We had built a fire, not the kind that burned for vengeance, but the kind that warmed, endured, and lit the way forward. And they could do nothing but watch it burn, beautiful, distant, and completely beyond their reach. We arrived at the gala in a quiet storm of poise. Neither overdressed nor flashy, just precise. Intentional. Sienna's dress flowed like ink beneath moonlight, her presence anchored by quiet confidence. I wore a classic black suit, not trying to prove anything, just polished enough to remind people I hadn't been broken by the years they hadn't seen me. When we stepped into the main atrium of the event, a high-ceilinged hall bathed in soft amber light and crystal reflections, I scanned the room and immediately spotted the usual suspects. VCs in whispery circles, disruptors with expensive smiles, old friends pretending not to see each other. Then, there he was. Marcus. I saw him before he saw me, his back partially turned as he laughed a little too loudly in a group of people that had likely forgotten what it meant to build anything with their hands. He hadn't changed much, same expensive suit, tailored just tight enough to suggest youth, same watch he used to flaunt on our poker nights, same smug grin. And clinging to his arm like an accessory was Clara. Her posture was perfect, shoulders back, a glass of champagne dangling between two elegant fingers. But her smile, it was hollow, distant, almost mechanical. Her eyes scanned the room with a flicker of unease that she didn't wear well. Sienna's hand rested lightly in mine, the gold of her bracelet brushing against my cuff. I didn't tense. I didn't flinch. I just nodded toward them. There they are, I said quietly. She glanced over, just long enough to take them in, then turned back to me. Let them see, she said simply. A few minutes later, we were pulled into a conversation by an industry peer, someone I respected, gritty, low ego, results-driven. As we spoke, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. Marcus was approaching. Alone. He moved with the stride of someone used to being welcomed, to having his voice carry weight just by existing in a space. When he stopped in front of us, I saw it. The hesitation. It flashed for only a second, but it was there. Adler, he said, extending a hand as if we were long-lost brothers catching up over drinks. Didn't expect to see you here. You've been quiet. Working, I said, shaking his hand with exactly as much grip as respect required. That tends to keep me busy. He laughed, awkward, like he was trying to gauge the temperature of the room. Then he glanced at Sienna. And you must be. Before I could answer, Sienna stepped forward with that smooth elegance that made every introduction feel like a benediction. Dr. Sienna Moreo, Director of Global Innovation for the UN, and his wife. You could feel the shift in the air. Marcus blinked. Recognition crawled across his face like a slow sunrise. You didn't know, hadn't known, until just now. Until she said it. You could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as headlines, LinkedIn articles, and panel announcements stitched themselves together in real time. And there it was, the look. That fractured flicker behind his eyes. He had just realized the man he thought he left behind had become someone untouchable. Clara joined him seconds later, her heels clicking against the marble like punctuation marks on a sentence she hadn't rehearsed. She saw me. Then Sienna. Her expression froze for half a heartbeat before the social smile returned. Painted, polished, paper-thin. Well, Clara said, voice tight. Small world. Smaller when you build it yourself, I replied, casually. Sienna didn't bother to hide her smirk. Marcus scrambled to recover. Still doing architecture and field work? I saw something in Tech Human last year. Clay and Field, right? He tried to say the name like it was unfamiliar, like he hadn't read every article trying to see if I mentioned him. Stillwater now too, I said. We build for permanence, not applause. Clara lifted her glass, the light catching on her ring big, cold, sharp. Well, it looks like you've moved up. Sienna turned to her, smiling gently. He didn't move up. He just kept moving. And that was it. There was no slap, no argument, no fireworks. Just a moment, quiet and unshakable, where the truth stood naked in the space between us. Marcus had the wealth, sure. Clara had the glitter. But we had the future. A real one. Not based on perception, but on substance. We were called away a minute later. Sienna was scheduled to give her keynote, and I had to prep for a panel discussion immediately after. As we walked toward the main hall, I glanced back one last time. Marcus was still watching. Clara stood beside him, but her eyes had followed us as we left. For the first time since they'd disappeared from my life, they looked like the ones left behind. Backstage, Sienna adjusted the mic on her collar. I watched her, silhouetted against the stage lights, and realized something powerful. I wasn't standing next to a woman to make a point. I was standing beside someone I admired, respected, loved. And I hadn't needed revenge to get here. I had simply chosen to keep building. Her speech was thunderous without ever raising her voice. She spoke about innovation and humanity, about building frameworks that honored the people who would live in them, about legacy. I watched from the side, not as a husband hungry for praise, but as a man in awe of the woman beside him. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, standing, extended, sincere. As the lights shifted and the next portion of the event unfolded, I saw Marcus again, still in his spot, still clapping, but this time, slower, thoughtful. Not because he was proud, because he finally understood. He had tried to win a game I had stopped playing long ago. He chose the short-term victory, flash, status, convenience. And I chose silence. I chose building. I chose truth. And in that moment, surrounded by applause that wasn't mine, I realized something even deeper. I didn't need their validation. I didn't even need their regret, because nothing they could ever say or do would change what was already true. I had built a life so solid, so meaningful, so beyond their grasp, that even their presence couldn't shake it. And that was everything. I didn't blink. Not when Marcus tossed that smug insult across the space between us. Not when Clara's face shifted from surprise to recognition, and certainly not when I turned calmly to Sienna and said, "Love, meet Marcus and Clara, my old friend and ex-fiancé." The look on Clara's face was priceless, jaw slightly open, one brow twitching as if she couldn't decide whether to feign delight or retreat. Marcus, on the other hand, wore a smirk full of assumptions. He had spoken like he was still playing the same game, status, ego, the cheap thrill of one-upmanship. "Poor you. Still alone, huh?" he'd said, "while I'm bathing in luxury." It was the kind of thing someone says when they're certain they've already won. Sienna extended her hand before I could say more, grace in every movement. "Dr. Sienna Moreo," she said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Director of Global Innovation, United Nations." Then she added, without the slightest edge, "and his wife." That's when everything in Marcus's expression changed. I watched it flicker across his face like static on a dying television. Recognition, disbelief, then something darker. Panic, maybe. Embarrassment. Whatever it was, it hit him hard and fast, like someone had dropped a name he should have known all along and now realized he'd missed something monumental. Clara was frozen, champagne glass still dangling in her right hand, her perfectly lacquered nails tapping against the stem. She stared at Sienna like she'd seen a ghost, but not the kind that haunted out of malice. The kind that reminded her how far she hadn't come. Wait, you're the keynote? Marcus said, voice dry. For the summit? Sienna nodded lightly, her posture effortless. Closing speaker. I'll be outlining cross-continental strategies for sustainable rebuilding and post-conflict economic policy. She turned to me and smiled. And afterward, we'll be announcing the third expansion of Stillwater's Refugee Innovation Hub program. Clay and Field just finished the prototype design last month. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Marcus's expression had already collapsed into something far less certain than the man who just moments ago called me poor. Wow, Clara said finally, a weak attempt at casual. Small world. I tilted my head. Not really. We just kept moving. I could see the fracture in Marcus's ego, hairline at first, then widening. He had come over expecting dominance, an easy scene, maybe even a second act in a drama he thought he was still directing. But now he stood in front of the woman Forbes called the most influential voice in global economics. And she wasn't just here. She was mine, my partner, my wife. And everything about her presence redefined what power looked like. What made it worse for him, I imagine, was that there was no revenge in my eyes. No smugness. No pointed laugh. I wasn't here to win anything. That's what undid him. Because it meant I'd already won without even trying. I had left the board entirely and built a new game. You two look. Well, Sienna said, her smile warm, but her eyes clear. She knew exactly what she was doing. Holding the mirror steady so they could see every crack. Clara glanced at Marcus, the tension between them palpable now. The kind of tension that comes not from love, but from a house built too quickly with bad materials. The kind that buckles under weight. Well, this has been. Marcus trailed off, clearly searching for an exit that didn't sound like defeat. We'll see you around. Sienna and I turned back toward the ballroom, our shoulders brushing as we walked. Her hand found mine, our fingers naturally locking as we moved past another cluster of guests, past whispers and turned heads. We didn't speak for a while. We didn't need to. It wasn't until we reached the hallway outside the main floor that she leaned in slightly and said, that was more satisfying than I expected. I chuckled, low and warm. You didn't even break a sweat. She squeezed my hand. They thought they were dealing with the version of you they left behind. They didn't see the one I married. I paused then, letting her words land. She was right. They still saw me as the man with the crumbling engagement, the one who disappeared into the fog of heartbreak. They hadn't bothered to learn what became of me after their champagne toast to betrayal. They didn't know about the nights I stayed up sketching blueprints by lamplight, the mornings I ran until my lungs burned just to quiet the noise in my head. They didn't see the man who had built structures that could stand against war, displacement, and climate devastation. The man who had helped turn temporary shelters into permanent sanctuaries. The man Sienna chose. Back inside the hall, the lights dimmed slightly as the next speaker took the stage. We found our seats near the front, where a small brass placard bore Sienna's name. People nodded as we passed. Some offered hushed compliments. Others just gave knowing looks, the kind reserved for those who no longer have anything to prove. I didn't look back at Marcus and Clara again that night. I didn't need to. I knew exactly how they were sitting. I knew the weight of silence between them. The quiet fury of expectations cracked in half. Later, as Sienna and I stood outside waiting for our car, she leaned against me, the crisp night air curling around us like a question already answered. What do you think he saw? She asked softly. His reflection, I said. And mine. The car pulled up, the driver stepping out to open the door. I guided her in, followed, and as we drove off, I looked out the window, not to check if they were watching, but to feel the city lights pass over me like a baptism. This wasn't about revenge. This was about restoration. And as far as I was concerned, Marcus and Clara had just witnessed something far more painful than vengeance. The man they left behind had not only survived, he had evolved. They say silence speaks loudest when the room expects a reaction. And that night, I didn't give them one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't boast or try to settle a score. I stood beside my wife, watched Marcus fumble with the weight of reality, and I let the silence do what years of explanations never could. That moment wasn't built on revenge, it was built on proof. Proof that I'd grown into a life that made their betrayal irrelevant. Proof that my success didn't depend on their failure, but theirs was suddenly diminished by my presence. As Sienna took the stage for her keynote, I sat in the front row, listening not just as a husband, but as a man who knew the terrain she spoke of. War zones turned into neighborhoods. Broken economies rebuilt with intention. Homes that did more than shelter, they dignified. Her words moved through the room like light. Strong, measured, undeniable. She spoke without needing validation, because her work already lived in the real world, where numbers weren't just numbers, but names and families and futures. And every time she referenced the housing frameworks or cited our refugee prototype model, I felt it. Not pride, not ego, just presence. I was here, and they had to sit in that truth. When the standing ovation erupted, I didn't turn to see Marcus or Clara, but I felt their gaze. Heavy, disbelieving, and still searching. After Sienna stepped off stage and the crowd thinned toward the reception hall again, I saw them in the periphery. Marcus stood still, arms folded, as if grounding himself in denial. Clara, by his side, clapped politely, her expression unreadable. They looked like guests at a wedding they weren't invited to, unsure of which side they were meant to sit on. Backstage, I met Sienna with a glass of water. She was glowing, not from vanity or applause, but from alignment. From doing what she was meant to do. "You were incredible," I said, handing her the glass. She smiled. They listened, even the ones who didn't want to. We lingered a few moments before returning to the main room. The music had changed, lower now, ambient, as conversations swirled and glasses clinked. People approached us one by one. Some introduced themselves with genuine curiosity. Others tried to network. A few dropped compliments wrapped in suggestions, subtle pitches dressed up as praise. We navigated it all with practiced ease, giving time to those who respected it and drifting past those who didn't. Then Clara reappeared. She walked toward us with slow, deliberate steps, like someone approaching the edge of a truth they had tried to forget. Her dress, perfect as it was earlier, now looked like armor. She paused a few feet from us, holding her purse in both hands like she didn't quite know what to do with them. "I owe you an apology," she said, eyes flicking between us, but never landing. I waited, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted to hear what she really meant, not what she rehearsed. "I wasn't honest with you. Back then," she continued, "and I didn't have the courage to face what I did, not even after it all happened. Seeing you now, hearing about what you've built, I stopped her with a small wave of my hand. "Clara," I said quietly, "you don't owe me anything. Not anymore." She blinked, clearly not expecting that. I could see it, her need to redeem the past, to rewrite it slightly now that I was no longer beneath her. But the past was already etched. It had made its mark, and it didn't need her revisions. "You made a choice," I continued, "and so did I. The difference is, I didn't make mine to hurt you. I made it to rebuild myself." She nodded slowly, lips pressed together. "Marcus, he thought you'd disappear." "I did," I said, "but not the way he hoped." Sienna stepped forward then, not as a defense, but as a presence. Calm, grounded. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence was both shield and mirror. Clara swallowed. "She's exceptional." "She is," I agreed, no hesitation. There was nothing more to say. Clara didn't reach for a hug. She didn't cry. She just stood there, realizing perhaps for the first time that her place in my story was no longer active. She wasn't the heartbreak. She wasn't the lesson. She wasn't even the antagonist. She was simply a beginning I'd outgrown. When she turned and walked away, there was no bitterness in her steps, just quiet. Later in the evening, as Sienna and I exited the venue, I caught one last glimpse of Marcus. He stood alone now, at the edge of a marble staircase, looking out into the crowd but not really seeing them. His tie was loosened. His expression slackened. He looked like a man who had finally seen the full picture, but too late to change the frame. We got into our car, the doors shutting out the noise of the gala behind us. Sienna leaned her head on my shoulder as the driver pulled away, the lights of the city shimmering on the windshield like fragments of all the versions of myself I'd left behind. "She apologized," Sienna said, more as a statement than a question. I nodded. "She did. Did it change anything?" I turned my head slightly, kissed her hairline. "No, because she apologized to the man I used to be, and I'm not him anymore." The rest of the ride was quiet. No need for more words. No need for unpacking. Just the two of us, shoulder to shoulder, soul to soul. And somewhere far behind us, Marcus and Clara stood in the ruins of the story they tried to write over mine. But this story was never theirs to finish. It was mine. and it had only just begun. The morning after the gala, we drove along the coastal road outside Lisbon, the sun rising in fragments across the water. Sienna's hand was warm in mine, her fingers intertwined with a kind of quiet certainty. There were no more speeches to give, no more suits to wear. Just us, the open road, and the sound of possibility humming between us like the wind threading through the trees. She looked over at me, eyes soft. "You've been quiet." I smiled. "I'm thinking." "About them?" "No," I said, and meant it. "About how good this feels." She nodded, resting her head on the seat, the morning light cutting across her cheek. "It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up giving us the clearest path forward." I let those words hang in the air for a moment. Clara and Marcus had once been my center of gravity. Everything revolved around what they did, how they made me feel, what they took from me. But now, after all the silence, the rebuilding, the healing, I saw it differently. They didn't just betray me. They released me, freed me from a version of myself that had settled for less than I deserved. If they hadn't turned on me, I might have married Clara, might have built a life filled with surface wins and hollow applause. I might have stayed in rooms where I was only half heard, where love was performance and loyalty was negotiable. But instead, I found something real, someone real. Sienna didn't just love me. She respected me. She challenged me. She saw the man I was and the man I could be, and she never once asked me to shrink. And in return, I gave her everything I never knew I still had to give. We pulled over at a small overlook where the cliffs dropped sharply into the sea. She got out first, wind tugging at the edge of her jacket. I followed, stepping into the breeze that smelled like salt and sunlight. For a while, we just stood there, watching the waves hit rock, watching the gulls dive and rise. Then I said it, the thing that had settled in my chest since the gala. I think I needed to see them again. Not for closure, but to measure how far I've come. She turned to me, her expression unreadable at first, then calm. "You needed to see they didn't finish you." I shook my head. They didn't even know where I started. We sat on a bench nearby, and I reached into my jacket pocket. I hadn't planned it, but something told me to bring it. A letter. Short. 3 lines. From Marcus. "You won, brother." That's all it said. No apology. No explanation. Just that. A confession disguised as surrender. I passed it to Sienna. She read it once, then again, then folded it neatly and slid it back to me. "What are you going to say?" she asked. "Nothing." Because I wasn't playing to win. I wasn't chasing revenge or applause or old debts finally paid. I was building a life they could never afford, even with all their diamonds. As the waves crashed below and the sky pulled open above us, I closed my eyes and let the wind carry it all away. The past. The names. The weight. I was free. And more than that, I was whole.